Okay. Are we live? I think we are live. Well, hey, good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And it's always a treat to have our good friend Mike Lupica here with us. He's going to be talking about his brand new Sunny Randall novel and last Sunny Randall novel for a little while, called Robert B. Parker's Revenge Tour. And Mike has signed a batch of books for us. We don't have too many left, Barbara. I think they're, yeah, going fast.
That's a good thing, right, Patrick?
That's a great thing, yeah. But I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to snag one of the few remaining ones. And if you have questions for Mike or Barbara, just go ahead and put them in there, and I will come back on screen towards the end of the hour. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. This is so much fun. I'm really sad that, in fact, it's the last Sunny Randall that Mike is going to write, because he's handing it on to
Allison Galen.
Allison Galen, who will no doubt do a great job. But the good news is that Mike is going to be writing not just Jesse Stone, but also Spencer. And for those of you who like Spencer, there's a special treat in this book. Plus,
Yeah.
we get Hawk.
Yeah.
We get Hawk sounding like Hawk. You just did a wonderful job with the dialogue on this.
Barbara, these guys have been living inside my head since I picked up the God Wolf manuscript at an old Brentano's on Boylston Street when I was at Boston College. And Bob Parker's books have been read and reread. And I loved listening to Joe Mantegna doing on tape. This, you know, I think I've told you this before. When I wrote my first chapter, when Ivan held the Tato de Cupi, the boss, the big boss at Capo de Tutti Capo at Putnam. Literally, the minute I wrote the first scene with Sunny and Spike, I just said, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I never had any plan to be there, but it just felt like I was sitting down with friends. And I mean, it's not a big spoiler alert, but hang in there if you're reading Revenge Tour, because Spencer and Hawk do show up about halfway through.
Well, they really do. Of course, Susan Silverman's been in here all along, because she has been acting as Sunny's therapist. And so what we've done, which I think has been fun, is we have seen Spencer through Susan Silverman's eyes. Susan Silverman, who never ages. I mean, come on, Mike, how fair is that?
I just try to keep the car in the lane, Barbara. They're kind of fixed in time, and it's not like Rebus, you know, it's not like Harry Bosch, which are two of my favorite characters on the planet, but they sort of stay. It's like that. What is it? It's not Dorian Gray, because nothing ever happened. They don't age. So it's, but no, I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm telling you, Sunny, I'll just say, Sunny shows up at Spencer's office and the three of them start talking. And I just said, oh my God, how much I have a great job.
Well, he really does. And I mean, when Hawk goes after the redhead in the bar, I mean, it's just so classically Hawk. But anyway, the other thing that's really fun about this book, aside from the joy of collecting so many characters, is that Melanie Joan Hall returns. And this book really is kind of a literary thing, because the question is, has Melanie Joan Hall plagiarized, or has she stolen the concept of her breakout book, her amazing breakout book? And that's a whole through line throughout the story, where other things happen. But before we get to that, I marked a space here, because Mike and I, unlike Susan and Spencer and the rest of them, are getting older. And he has this one line in here that totally emphasizes what it's like to be aging. I laughed so hard when I read this. And it goes like this. You were too young when, well, I have to start earlier. Melanie Joan was asleep when I got back to River Street Place. My father was watching a Blue Bloods rerun in the living room. I think Tom Selleck is trying to look more like Theodore Roosevelt with that mustache and those little glasses, he said. You know, Roosevelt was the first police commissioner in New York, right? I do know that, I said, that being Sunny. And I liked Selleck much better when he was Magnum. You were too young when the old Magnum was on, Phil Randall said, in the early stages of an exhaustive search for his car keys. I'm telling you. I mean, if you knew how many times the staff at the Poison Pen has had to like comb the bookstore for my car keys. And in fact, at one point, about 3 weeks ago, my car keys disappeared. None of us could find them. I mean, we're looking under the car, we're looking everywhere. My husband had to drive down with the spare set of keys to give them to me so I could take Ann Hillerman for dinner. And it turned out that they had fallen underneath a book in one of the mail tubs with which I carry all the ARCs, the advanced reading copies home, and none of us could find them. But so when I wrote, I just see Phil doing an exhaustive search for his car keys. And I thought, Mike really understands that. It's so hard to keep track of your stuff when your short-term memory begins to fade.
No, forget about that. If you ever realize you didn't know where your phone was because you're speaking on it at the time. I've done that before too.
No, but I can see that. But anyway, I love that. And Phil Randall, one of the other joys of this book is that Sunny's dad, Phil, who was like a great cop at the Boston PD, he has a kind of independent thing going on and he's under threat. So why did you decide, let's start with Phil. Why did you decide, Mike, to give Phil a fairly large chunk of this book?
I've always loved that character. I've always loved their relationship. I've always loved the byplay. The book opens with the two of them in the street bar at the hotel that's now called the Newberry, which is the old Ritz, which then became the Taj in Boston. And it is still one of the great bars on the planet. I went to Boston College. I sent 4 children through Boston College. I've spent an awful lot of my life in Boston, Massachusetts, in that part of the Back Bay. And so it just seemed like a perfectly natural place. But I felt like, not that I had underused him, because he's been in my Sunny books before, but I said, you know what, let's put him back into play. And if I go too deeply into his storyline, we start out, as you know, Barbara, with stories going in 2 lanes. And as often happens when I write these books, somehow those lanes occasionally can merge. And let's see, how would you call the nexus? I guess you'd call the nexus in this book is Melanie Jones' ex-husband, John Melvin, who was in Melancholy Baby and was terrorizing her. That's how Sunny met her. When I started writing the books, I made a decision to move Sunny away from the water and live in a house on River Street Place, just because I like the neighborhood. And so she became her landlord. So their relationship is complicated. When Melanie Jones comes back to Boston, they're about to start shooting this big series of her from her novels, and says that she is getting anonymous emails accusing her of stealing someone's content, stealing someone's character with the book that began her fabulously successful career. And that's the beginning of the book. And then people start dying. And then Phil Randall on his deal, because he's being terrorized by a mob lawyer, he's in danger, and Sunny's in danger, and Melanie Jones is in danger, and you have to read the book to find out what happens.
Well, that's absolutely true. But you're right. The nexus of it is Melanie Jones' ex-husband, who was a serial rapist. He was a professor.
Yeah, he was drugging women, and he and his friends were drugging women to have sex with them. And he ends up, Sunny and Richie in Melancholy Baby catch him at the end, and he's been put away forever, but he's still teasing her and taunting her from prison. And there becomes a suggestion, as you know, in this book, that maybe he's behind everything. And so he's a devilish character, but really fun to write. Really fun.
Yeah, well, of course, the bad guys are always fun to write.
That's what Leonard always told me. He says, I like bad guys better.
Right. Well, Parker was great on bad guys too. What I thought was interesting about the husband, I mean, he's in prison. He's in, I'm trying to remember, what do you call it? The name, the prison's like a gang name.
You can stump me on that. I'm up in Paradise, Massachusetts right now.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, he's in whatever Massachusetts prison this is. And he's not in good shape. He has not aged well in prison because Sunny goes to see him and she's shocked to see some characters actually do age in these books.
Yes, he
And
does.
he's one. So he's not looking healthy. And but he's still clearly evil-minded, and he's still clearly, although he denies it, bent on revenge. You can't really escape.
And he knows a lot. Even from prison, he knows a lot about what's going on here, which makes Sunny even more suspicious of this guy, even though from prison, he should pose no threat, but he becomes a menacing character, even though he's this old guy in prison.
Well, yeah, he has money, he has connections, he could have hired things done. And, you point out, and it's really true, that thanks to cell phones and all, prisons are a lot more porous than they once were. There's a really high degree of like phone smuggling and, stuff traded around in prisons. So you can't believe he's truly incommunicado, can you?
No, it's funny. I wrote Mr. Patterson and I are just putting up another book on its legs right now. And I wrote a line about that subject. And somebody said, wait, you can get a burner phone in prison?
Yeah.
And one of our main characters says, you can start your own YouTube channel from prison.
Yeah, apparently so. So anyway, he is an active threat, even if he is behind bars. But the other thing to remember is that he was academically, he was okay. He was a terrible human being. But as a professor, Melanie Joan had terrible taste in men. We see
her first husband,
clearly.
Her first husband, as we discover in this book, Dr. Hall, the horny English professor, he's as bad as her second husband, and just happened to exist in a world before Me Too, because he was preying on co-eds like her when she was at my fictional college in upstate New York, where I grew up, Whitesboro College.
Yep. So Melanie Joan, even though they're long divorced and so forth, she still gives him credit for, help. She gives these guys credit for, for helping her career. And she's turned into, one of those kind of megastar authors with, Hollywood agents and, television deals and best-selling books and beaucoup bucks. And then we find out that she's actually spending some of her money, I won't say how, but more like alimony for one of these ex-guys, and that seems really strange. So she's a really complicated character. Did you add layers to her from Melancholy Baby, Mike?
I've added a lot of layers to her. I gave her this backstory, Barbara. All you really know in Melancholy Baby is she was married to this pervert psychologist. And so I've just, the backstory now is this place at the bottom of Beacon Hill. And the backstory is that she did become, she branched out into television and becoming an empire. But the most important thing that I do as I develop this character is the first husband, is the young woman that she was. And she has been a fabulous, really, about how her career started. But that doesn't mean that she's a plagiarist, too. And that's part of the mystery that Sunny has to solve.
Absolutely true. I mean, she is a fabulous, but then again, she's a romance writer, a romance queen. And so you sort of have to be a fabulist in order to do that. And she's been purposely vague about some questions in her life. She was at the college. Did she graduate? Did she have her first job at the newspaper? How long did it last? Whatever. So we really end up doing a pretty deep dive into Melanie Joan's life as it goes on. So we also have Sunny balancing, as Parker lead characters always do, personal life, romantic life. So Richie and his son Richard, who's pretty cute. Richie's still in the picture, but Richie's father-in-law, we actually spent some time with, father, not father-in-law. We actually spent some time with Richie's father, who is, as you say, not just the head of the Irish mob, he is the Irish mob in Boston today, right?
Yeah, Desmond Burke to me is a great character. The the first Sunny Randall I wrote was, he was the centerpiece of the story, and a long lost young man that was or was not his son. And Blood Feud was about that. Okay. But Desmond is still going strong. He outlasted Whitey Bulger. He outlasted everybody. He coexists in a world with Tony Marcus. And yeah, and as you know, if you read the book, I introduce someone else, a young man, not particularly young, for Sunny to be interested in. And
you do. And I liked him. I mean, I think he's a.
I liked him too. Yeah. Tom Gorman.
But you're handing it on to Al. So Jesse has, you know how Rita Fury, if you know the Spencers is Forever, was trying to seduce Spencer, right? And never going anywhere. But right now in this book, and this is not giving anything away because it's right there at the beginning, she's been rewarded with Jesse. So Jesse Stone and Rita Fury are an item. And Sunny misses Jesse some, but possibly more because of as a partner in investigation than an actual bed partner. But anyway, so that's going on. And then there's Richie and young Richard, and that's going on. So you've now given her this new guy. Are you handing that off to Allison as a gift or what?
I did not think of it that way. I told my fabulous editor, Danielle Dietrich, I said, listen, does Allison know, has she read the whole book? Because she has a relationship with this, a nascent relationship. They haven't really, done anything except meet up.
Well, that's true. It could be, a drink in New York in the bar. It could be a one-night stand. It could be, something ongoing. But I did think it was interesting that you decided to hand this guy over to Allison to do whatever she wants to with it.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick and I were talking before I started tonight, just spitballing on some things I might do with Spencer. And, there's this unanswered question at the end of Ace's last one, whether Hawk might have a daughter. I don't think he does. And I've dealt with Jesse's son in the Jesse Stone, but he's really a minor character. With Spencer, you're going to get your old reliables. I'm going to keep that particular car on the road because I love Bob's version of Spencer from the start until Six Kill. He's a perfect character. He's as great a character as he's there are others that I would put in that category. Harry Bosch is one for sure. And Rebus is another one. And we could list some others. My pal Ide just brought back Philip Marlowe. Okay. But Spencer is, the classic knight errant. And so I'm not going to be, tied, Ace did 10 of them. And I thought, I love Ace's work. I love his Quinn novels. They're great, but it's going to be my imagining of where Spencer is in his life with
well, it's not just Spencer. You have to deal with Susan and Hawk too. It's kind of a three-legged stand.
And Vinny. And, one of the things that has been fun about doing Sunny and Jesse is people are so pleased when you do have a repertory company.
That's right.
Vinnie Morris is a great character to write. Tony Marcus is a great character, and he pops up in the Jesse that I just finished. And because they had a relationship in life. So it's that canvas, Barbara, it's such a fun canvas. And yeah, you could tell how much I love Spike. Spike is just one of the great characters that Bob ever imagined. And I think I've expanded that too, because I said, this is an extraordinarily interesting man. And I think there's a line in, I think it's in this book, or it might be in the New Jesse. I get them confused sometimes, where Sunny had referred to Spike as a gay superhero.
It's in this book.
And Jesse says, what kind of superhero am I? And she said, an inner directed one.
Well, he definitely is, but you also bring Lee, the gay Boston cop, into the
Oh,
into
yeah,
this.
yeah.
And I thought, I mean, who knows? Spike has got a partner. Spike is, loves his restaurant, which Sunny saved from, complete disaster. And so
Payback,
Spike
yeah,
is,
payback,
yep,
yeah.
it's doing really well. They spend some time there, but I thought that, who knows? Maybe Spike and Lee can keep up. At
Well,
least be buddies.
Sonny keeps thinking that Spike and Lee should be together, but they, as they point out to her, just because they're gay and attractive doesn't mean that they're the two guys that she knows should become a couple. But one of the fun things in this book, as you know, is Lee and Phil Randall get thrown together in an odd couple situation for a while when Lee's kind of looking out for the old man, which is it lends itself to some funny stuff.
It does. And in fact, Phil Randall then has to actually spend some time with Desmond Burke, which was, difficult for both of them. So there's a lot of interaction in this book.
That was my grumpy old man scene, Barbara. That was like Lemon and Mathau and Grumpy Old Men when Phil and Desmond actually have to help each other out.
Yep. No, it's very well done. I wasn't sure you were going to bring it off, but I mean, not that you couldn't write it, but that you would actually get them in the same room, but somehow or other, miraculously, it happens.
Yeah.
So I decided that only an author with your now vast experience would have fastened upon this plot. What was it that made you think that plagiarism or the accusation of plagiarism was going to be the engine to drive at least Melanie Jones' plot?
It's this, it's as Melanie Jones said, it's the Scarlet Letter. If you're accused of stealing someone's content, that is, as she says, it's the Me Too of literary pursuits. That once you get tagged with that, you never recover. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if someone even suggested it? Because all you have is the suggestion. There's these anonymous emails, and there's these threat. It kind of produced this cover with the knife in the book and blood, because Melanie Jones comes back to her. Yeah, she comes back to her room one night at the Newberry, and there is a knife snuck into her work, and so is revenge tour that I very rarely get to name my books. I always, my editors name them, or sometimes I do, but this one, Revenge Tour, was just for a book tour, and it seemed like a perfect way to describe what's going on, because there is something that happened when she was in college that began the action. The action of this book really begins 40 years ago, and something happens in her life, intersected with someone, and it causes her, as you know, a world of grief. And it's, again, for Sunny to sort out, because Sunny has very complicated feelings for Melanie Joan Hall. She's very grateful that she gets to live in this fabulous home with Rosie the dog, and she does like her, but she doesn't always believe her. And she doesn't always know whether Melanie is telling her the truth, or, again, this fabulous version of how she thought her life brought her to this moment. And so Spike's got to watch her, and Sunny's got to take some trips to upstate New York and delve into what happened to her when she was in college. And her first husband is, in the early stage, not even the early stages of senility. And away we go. And we go from Boston to upstate New York to Western Massachusetts, and then back to Boston. But we do make that fun pit stop at Berkeley and Boylston, at an office for Spencer that Sunny says should be given landmark status.
Melanie Joan, after all, makes her living making stuff up. And one of the things that she may be making up is her own self, not just her literary creations, but she herself may be, in fact, a creation, because, as you point out, she's a fabulist, which is a great word that we don't use all that often, but a fabulist really is going to be forever an unreliable narrator, going to be of their own life as well as, creating lives and so forth. And of course, she's really rich. So by now, and that gives you a lot of leeway. It's one thing to be a fabulist if nobody can see you or if you don't have any impact. But so she has an agent, she has an editor, publisher. I mean, teachers. All of these people are in play in the book. These are all people who
some of them not for long.
Well, but they're there nonetheless. There's
Right.
a sort of cadre, that goes around a successful author like that. I mean, not that many writers really make it to the level that you give to Melanie Joan.
Yeah. I think that's it's not the Harlequin romance series, but she's writing those bodice ripping books, but they've become very successful, and now she's spun it off to the granddaughter of her her original character. But somebody says she stole the character.
Right. It's actually the character that, not so much the story, but the character that is in
on which she built her empire.
I couldn't help but think of Barbara Cartland. There was a weird study not a weird study, but self awareness, I think, or maybe it's mental floss. Anyway, they often have these little funny quiz kind of a things. And one I read the other day, or with 10, who are the 10 most prolific authors of all time? Who are the authors whose works have been published the most? I almost fell over when I worked out who the first one was. I'll give you a guess.
Was it? Is it my friend, Mr. Patterson?
No, he's on the list, but he's not near the top.
He's not.
No.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to throw names out. I mean, is it Barbara Cartland? Is it Mary Higgins?
Well,
Clark?
Barbara Cartland is on the list. Unsurprisingly, Agatha Christie's on the list. Barbara Cartland's on the list.
Daniel
James Patterson's on the list. The actual number one most published author of all time is Mao Zedong.
Really?
Yep. Mao's, Little Red Book and all the rest of it. I mean, it adds up to billions. Agatha Christie is number 2, but Barbara Cartland is right in there. And it made me think about Melanie Joan Hall, because Barbara Cartland was in some ways quite a lot like her, and wrote just a phenomenal amount of mostly romance. And I mean, I think she said at one point she might have written like 40 in 1 year or something. I mean, some amazing total. And I've always remembered her because somebody did an interview with her, and she became in late life quite a large lady. And somebody asked her something about, how she'd elected to age. And she said, you have 2 choices, she said, as you age. One is the body, one is the face. I, she said, have selected the face. And so she had, she clearly, was a master at makeup and hairstyle and surgery, but, her body had largely gone to pot, as you could plainly see in any photographs. So I've always liked that. She said, has selected the face.
My friend, the late Paul Hornig, who was a pal of mine used to show up in New York City a lot when his playing days were over. He finally quit smoking, but when he quit, he had put on a few pounds, and we hadn't seen him since then. And he said, boys, I've just decided to live a longer but more obese life. And he did.
Good for him. Excellent. Anyway, Barbara Cartland, I thought to some degree Melanie Joan would be like her. And, it's amazing how much money, if you're that prolific, it's amazing how much money you can accumulate by publishing that frequently, even, if no one book is necessarily a barn burner, if you have a whole collection of them with royalties from earlier books. I mean, if you are a successful author, the earlier books you have written can provide you, it's like residuals and commercials for television when that was a big thing. It can provide you with a real income stream, aside from whatever you might happen to make with your new work. So,
well, what's interesting is when Melanie Jones starts getting these emails, they talk about wanting money, but nobody ever asks for money. This is someone who believes they were wronged. And
Yeah. Yeah, they want to expose her. That's why you call it revenge tour.
and
Yeah.
I think for anybody who will read this book, I think it's a pretty surprising conclusion. I think it's a pretty surprising ending. That
It's a nifty book. And it's a lot of fun if you like books about books. You know, there's a whole bookish thing going on, and why you wouldn't necessarily, but that's not true. If you go all the way back to the Godwolf manuscript, let's be real. You know, there was a bookish. I mean, Parker himself was a PhD in English, wasn't it? Isn't
a
that
very literary man,
Yeah.
a very well-read and literary man, and it it's Spencer with an S, like the poet. I mean, it's
Yeah.
he from that moment on, he revealed himself that this wasn't just your your normal private gumshoe. This was someone who was different. This is someone who was well read. This is someone who could quote poetry, and then beat the crap out of you in the next moment.
Yeah, well, you can even tell looking at him. There's I'm trying to think of his name, a guy that wrote a book with Tess Gerritsen recently, lives in Maine. And he went to college with Bob, and he sent me several photos of Bob. And one of them is the two of them are jogging, back when they were in college. And, Bob's a big guy, right? And there he is, and he's short. Oh, thank you, Patrick. Gary Braber, or Gary Braber, whichever way he pronounces it, sent me several photos of Bob when he was young in college and all. And you could sort of imagine him working out at Henry Simoli's gym, because he's in the shorts and the shirt and he's going along. And that's one side of Bob. But then the other one is the guy in the library, deep into the dissertation and the Godwolf manuscript. He was a really interesting man.
Oh, and a dapper guy. I mean, a really sharp dresser. And as you know, he liked to sing to the point where he actually made an album of songs from the Great American Songbook with his son. And no, he was so much fun. This. He was so much fun to know. He was so much fun to be around. I think I've told you before. We would end up in the same city on a book tour once in a while, and it would just be a joy of my life to sit and have dinner with him and just listen to him tell stories. I was at the famous house that he and Joan shared in Cambridge. I was doing some pieces for public broadcasting back in the day, and I did a piece on the Yankees and the Red Sox, and he was just fabulous. It was just fabulous. And even now, when I go into my laptop, and I haven't erased any of his emails, they're almost all about baseball.
I know. I have some too. We used to drink, at the Biltmore when he would come out here. We used to go over, I would meet him at the Biltmore, and we would talk about the pain of being, this was quite a while back, the pain of being both a Red Sox and a Cubs fan. And I used to tease him and say, will either of us ever live long enough to see either of our teams win a pennant? And I've always been glad that Bob lived long enough to see the Red Sox. And I actually have managed to see the Cubs win one. So there we are. But yeah, a lot of it was baseball. A lot of it was Joan. A lot of it, he talked about Joan and her cancer surgery. She didn't have reconstructive surgery after she had her cancer surgery. And, and he was really proud of his boys. And so, and we used to email a lot. And in fact, I knew when the email stopped, and that was also true of Ed McBain, because we used to email a lot. And after several days went by, I remember saying to my husband, because Ed had, throat cancer, I think it was, anyway, whatever, form of cancer. And I said to Rob, he's gone. And Rob said, how do you know? Because and I said, because he stopped emailing. And, with Bob, you could kind of tell that surgery that was so disastrous. He never really got over it, did he?
No, he didn't. And even then, the day that we all started to hear that he had passed away, I've used this analogy before, and if you're in our world, this analogy is appropriate. I felt like Wilt Chamberlain had died. Nobody ever thought Wilt Chamberlain could die. He was like Superman. And when we heard that he had died that day, and then when we found out he had died at his desk. That Joan had gone out and came back and found him. And it was, people always say, well, it's not a bad way to go. Well, I probably didn't think so, but it was, to use an old Pete Hamill line, it was like 100 guys had suddenly left the room. That's the way I felt when I found out that Bob Parker died.
Well,
And that's why it's such an honor. I mean, for me to be in this world at this stage of my life, after having been a fan from, for all of my adult life or what passes for my adult life. But for me to have found my way to getting to write his characters and having this one brief period where, it was right. I'll be writing two, but I feel like I was writing all three at once. And I told the boss, Ivan Held, if you could arrange for there to be 15 months in a year, I would have kept writing them all.
Well, you do manage to get all three of the major characters into this book, even if Jesse's not physically present. So it is fun. We've got Sunny, we've got Jesse, we've got Spencer, Susan, Hawk, Richie, Rita Fiore sort of by mention, and also it's a real love fest.
And Sunny may, Barbara, it may turn out that Sunny may have wandered into Fallout, which is the new Jesse.
I won't be at all surprised if we see sort of more of this. And, I don't know that, I think Bob would really have liked that. I mean, I've never been entirely sure, to be honest, why he kept the names separate, but he brought in the other characters in the ensemble did wander into the other books,
Yeah, he did. He's the one who put Jesse and Sunny together. And I could tell in his last Jesse that he had become that's the way they were going. And that's why, I didn't feel like I was taking some great leap by making them a couple again. I mean, you remember, I forget which book it was where they're misbehaving in a dressing room at an elegant clothing store in Los Angeles. So I feel that I've carried on in that spirit. And I feel like I'm honoring all the characters and not just the main characters.
Well, Parker made us, to some degree, he would eventually Spencer and Susan firmly stick together, but he liked writing characters that had difficult relationships. I mean, Jesse needed to get rid of Jen, and, Sunny and Richie have been on and off again. And, he kind of liked that. And I don't know, do you think part of that was because he had put Spencer and Susan together so solidly after their 3-book split that he felt like he had to maintain that push me, pull you thing with Jesse and Sunny to sort of make up for the Spencer Susan thing?
Yeah, and I think it was just fun. I think it was just a fun way to write those two characters. And for them to not be sure where they stood with each other. Right. Jesse says even now in the book that I just finished, he still loves Sunny. And he said, what we had didn't end badly. It just ended. And so they're kind of still on good terms. And so it's
it wasn't an ugly breakup. I agree with you. See, I've always really liked Richie. I've never been entirely sure why Sunny, can't manage to figure things out with Richie. But so I didn't think, Jesse's never really found the right woman so far. In fact, there was one, and didn't she die or something? I'm trying to remember. There was one I really liked.
Abby the lawyer. He was in love with Abby the lawyer, and then she was murdered by the serial killer couple. And no, I don't think it's as much Richie as that Sunny just couldn't wrap her brain and her heart around being married. I think that's, that more Richie didn't have commitment issues. She had commitment issues.
Well, I think it's commitment issues, but, part of the shtick that Bob at least introduced into it was that she didn't like being connected with the mob, that Desmond, and his mob connection was hard, but I don't really think that holds up, and it certainly doesn't in this book. So I think you're right. I think it is a commitment. Well, of course you're right, because you wrote it. What am I saying here? But yeah, I do think you make it clear that it's much more about a commitment issue than it really is about Desmond Burke and and the mob connection and so forth. I mean, Sunny's life would not be destroyed professionally if she were married to the son of Desmond Burke. You know, it's just
No, her father being a cop complicated it. Her being a cop complicated it. Even though Richie, as a son of the Irish mob, never had anything to do with the Irish mob, he's a legitimate saloon keeper, and it's in the new Jesse. I mean, it's funny. These people become so real to me. There's some stuff in this one you're going to love because Jesse and Richie team up to help.
Oh, great. Well, I will look forward to it. We get to talk about that one in September, right?
Yeah, September.
Excellent. Well, I will look forward to that. Now, I want to go back to, because you mentioned it earlier, we were able to do the launch party with you and James Patterson for The Horsewoman.
Oh, boy.
And I couldn't help but think of the two of you at the Derby. I mean, if you had written that into a book, would anybody have actually believed it?
Barbara, I was on Morning Joe today to talk about that race. Okay. And I said, that race is why people love sports. That was a once in 100 years event. There will be books written about this horse. There will be movies made about this horse. It was a $30,000 claimer. It wasn't even supposed to be in the race. And if you have not done this yet, I encourage you or anybody watching us tonight, go back and look at the aerial view of the route that this jockey took to get to the finish line. It's like that horse went 2 miles instead of 1. It's the damnedest ride in history. Sonny Leon, you can talk about all the Arqueros and Shoemakers and everybody else. Ronnie Turcotte and Secretariat. That's the greatest ride of all time to get to the rail, to split those horses and win that race as an 80-1 shot. And my daughter, who was part of the inspiration of the Horsewoman, she's not a thoroughbred rider, but she's a show jumper. She was at Churchill Downs on Saturday with her boyfriend really? To watch that race. Yeah.
Oh, my father was in the telephone. He was one of the presidents of General Telephone when it was all being developed, and he retired at age 50 in order to play golf here in Paradise Valley, which I've always thought was a poor move on his part. 50 is just too damn young to actually retire. In fact, I started the Poison Pen when I was 50, so there you go. But in any case, there was a lovely man whom I met and who gave me, in my first marriage, an incredible, like all my sterling silver, all 12 pieces. Now, J. Graham Brown, and he owned the Brown Hotel in Louisville. Oh. And he invited my parents every year, up until Daddy retired, to go to the Derby with him, to stay at the Brown Hotel and sit in his box. And my mother said it was wonderful because Mr. Brown was allowed to drive into Churchill Downs in his limousine car. And Mother said it was the only time she ever felt like Queen Elizabeth. She could kind of look out and wave at the peasants as she went by. And I've always, I never attended the Derby myself, but those stories, I've always been, the mint juleps and the whole 9 yards. I've always wished that I could have just done that once, but I was, just didn't happen to work out. But Mr. Brown was a real legend. I don't even know if the Brown Hotel is still going.
I don't either, but my wife Taylor and Sue Patterson and Jim and I were out to dinner on Saturday night, and we were having an early dinner, but we got to wander over to the bar of this restaurant we were at, and we were only getting the commentary on closed caption because it was a very crowded bar.
Yeah.
And I went back to the table and I said, JP, something big just happened in the Kentucky Derby because they are talking about it like it's a once in a lifetime race. And you know why? Because it was a once in a lifetime race.
Because it was one, right? Well, I couldn't help but wonder if you two were, going to carry on with the Horsewoman, who I thought was a really great character and in a book I truly enjoyed. Whether you'd managed to incorporate the Derby into it in some way.
No, because we never close here, we've actually, Jim and I have finished 2 more books that'll be out next year.
Wow.
Not set in the world of, one's a dysfunctional family that owns a football team and a newspaper. And the other one is the first time I've been part of a courtroom thriller, which was an absolute blast doing this with Jim. Oh my God.
You know, if you hadn't been a newspaper columnist, you would never be able to be this damn productive. You're writing 2 Parkers and 2 Pattersons. I mean, when do you sleep?
You know, here's the thing, and I've told you this before. I have no other skills, so
Or life, apparently.
no, I get up in the morning and I write all morning. And if Bob used to write a certain amount of pages every day, and if at 11 o'clock I hit the number, and I feel like I'm going good and I can pick up my story tomorrow, it doesn't feel like work. It's just a blast. And I said this on television the other day. Can you imagine being lucky enough to write books with James Patterson at a time when you're also carrying on characters created by Robert Parker?
No, if you'd actually put it into a book, nobody would believe it. I would like to point out too, that Bob's books, as we all know, thinned down towards the end, but this is a full-fledged, how many pages is it? 316 pages without massive type size and so forth. So you're writing full-bodied books.
I write about 70,000 words, 75,000 words. But again, there's just always a point where I'll be writing along and I'll say, you know what? It's time to wrap this up now. And that's a very liberating thought that you can now, tie up all these loose ends and all the, people laugh at me when I say this, but I've never considered myself a great plotter. And then people read these books and they say, what are you talking about? It just, I kind of wander through the forest and somehow it all comes together in the end. But it's a process that I just kind of go with it. I don't really know how it happens.
You're subconscious. You're writing your own version of the jockey's race as you are working your way.
I split the horses and I get to the rail or I get to the outside and somehow I get to the finish line.
You do. And I'm pretty sure that Bob's goal was not pages. Bob wrote, what was it, 300 words a day? Wasn't that what he had a very minimal target.
Yeah, I think it might have been more than that. I think it was about 1,500 words, which, by the way, 1,500 for me is a little more than a column. Okay. And so that does not feel like I'm pushing myself. I write in the same sort of burst that I still write a newspaper column. And it just feels completely natural to me. I don't feel like that's, you tell that to other writers and they'll say, oh my God, you write 6 pages a day? And I say, well, sometimes I write 10 pages a day if I'm going good. But it doesn't, because of the column was the greatest possible training ground to become.
Absolutely.
You gotta have a beginning, a middle, and then you got to grab their attention. You got to know how to use dialogue. It's a perfect school.
Well, I mean, look at your fellow authors, Carl Hyacin, John Sanford, Michael Connolly, you guys all came up through reporting. And, if you're used to that discipline and all the rest of it, it obviously makes you all really productive. John's still writing 2 books a year. Mike is writing, doing television, the whole bit. I wish we saw Carl more often. It was a real treat to talk to you and Carl last fall. So I'm hoping that maybe we'll see another book from him.
He was supposed to introduce me the other night at the Vero Beach Book Center, but he swears he had a molar pulled, and he said, and when I doubted his version of things, because I said, what was your second excuse, that you were going to be kidnapped by space aliens? He promised to send me a picture of the molar, but when I got up there, I made fun of him for about 15 minutes.
Well, maybe
he was about 5 minutes from the bookstore.
I love it. Well, maybe when we get to September, you can invite Carl back because it was really fun to talk to him. Meantime, let's call Patrick up and see if we have questions from the audience or if we've just stunned them into silence, which might well be the case. Hey, Patrick.
Hey, you've stunned them into silence for the most part, but
well, you must have questions.
Well, I do. Yeah. Mike, you've written quite a few YA novels. Now, are you going to have time to do any of those in your spare time?
I will get back. There's one that I'm going to do, but in the short run, I can't do it. Again, I'll go back to what I said about Sunny and Jesse and Spencer. If you give me 3 more months of the year, I'll be fine. But if they're going to keep it to if they're going to keep it to 12 months, I've got more than enough to do. And again, it's the Horsewoman in particular was such a fabulous success. Barbara, we're still, Jim told me the other day, we're still selling like 3,000 copies a week of Horsewoman.
I'm not surprised. It was a really, really interesting book. And I thought you did it, did it super well.
Yeah, it was a blast from the start. And we've come up with some great characters since. And it's, I've told you before, it's like getting a master class in storytelling, working with him. And you better keep that story going, because if you don't, then we go back and we do it again until we get it exactly right.
Well, I think that's an interesting thought. Do you think that writing the Parkers and writing with Patterson, can you keep them separate, or do you need to?
No, I can keep them separate. I have my wife has always told me I have a great ability to compartmentalize. And once I finished, it just worked out perfectly. I finished Jesse, and I'm raring to go. The summer will be the new Patterson Lupica collaboration, and we've got a great idea. He has taught me the usefulness of outlining. He's a bear for outlines, and once you get, we outlined this book we're working on. It's a 100-page outline. It literally is a 100-page outline. But once you start, you've got this extraordinary roadmap, and we're able to, we're able to go point to point to point, and we talk every day, and we bounce stuff back and forth, and he sends me stuff, and it's just, I didn't know how it would work, and from the first week, it worked great. It just worked great.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. I'm delighted. Patrick, anything else that you'd like to ask, or is there a stray question?
There are a few stray questions. We have a new viewer from Italy who's been watching a lot of the programs, Stefania. And there may be a little bit of a language thing here, but she says, I would like to know from Mr. Lupica, let's see here, I just lost it. How does he feel about carrying on another writer's legacy? You've talked about that a bit. Do you ever fear the reader's opinions? Let's see, do you think you're faithful enough to the original idea? And you've been talking about that.
I'll take them in reverse, Patrick. Yes, I do believe I'm faithful to them. Yeah, I respect readers' opinions. If you don't, you're crazy. But ultimately, I always go back to the wisdom of Mr. Parker and Mr. Elmore Leonard, who is my dear friend and one of my writing heroes. Ultimately, you have to write to please yourself. If you don't please yourself, then you're in the wrong game. And hopefully, if you like what you're doing, the reader will like what you. And I was saying that before we started tonight. From the first book, the reception, I've now written 4 Sunnys, 2 Jessies. I just finished the 3rd Jessie. The reaction is always the same from the readers and from the critics. They just feel like that the torch got passed to me, and they're happy with what I've done with these characters.
Don't you feel like some of these characters they're almost like archetypes in a way? These. Even though Parker created this character, he, of course, when he was created, Spencer was drawing upon, classical archetypes, the knight errant.
Yeah.
In some ways, these characters are in our, subconscious, living and breathing somewhere.
And remember, hey, Patrick, Bob wrote 2 Philip Marlowe novels.
That's right.
He signed off on this being okay.
That's right. Let's see here. Another question. Let's see. Does the relationship of the writer with his characters change if they are part of a series instead of one book? I would think they would have to. Your investment.
Yeah, you want to keep the characters fresh, but I've told you this before. The first scene, the practice chapter I wrote for Sunny turned out to be the first chapter of Blood Feud, almost word for word. And the book begins with Sunny and Spike having a conversation, and she says, "Do you think I'm getting older?" And he says, "This is some kind of trap." And she said, "No, the UPS kid mammed me the other day." And Spike said, "I assume you shot him." And I again, from that moment on, I knew I was okay. I knew that these voices that I've been hearing for my whole adult life, without copying him, I got the spirit and the sound right. I believe I have.
Here's a question for you. Maybe you've been asked this, but since you knew Bob pretty well,
Yeah.
Do you ever find that when you're writing, something that he said in the past or some conversational element that was distinctive to him will pop into your mind and you'll put it in there as a little homage to him that nobody else would know?
I have never used this line in a book, but he had a lot of funny lines. He'd tell people, I'll read your book or I'll blurb it, but I won't do both. It was just pure him. And I think I told you this story before, and I've used variations of this when we were supposed to have dinner when we were both on a book tour. And he said, make it for 8:15. He called me Mikey. He said, Mikey, make it for 8:15. And I said, Bob, your signing doesn't end until 8. Are you sure you'll make it back in time? And he said, at 8 o'clock, if I'm writing Robert and I haven't gotten to Parker yet, I'm out of there.
Well, actually, he did, it was just like a double loop.
I remember Barbara at one of his events at the old store, that the paperback edition of Don Winslow's Cool Breeze on the Underground had come out. Big blurb on the front by Robert B. Parker. And I mentioned it to him. I go, yeah, this is a great book. He's all, never heard of the guy.
Yeah. Well, actually, my favorite was when he actually signed a book he was signing books that we had an Andrew Vox book and a Bob Parker book put together, and Bob signed both of them before we could stop him. It was so funny. And then, we decided we would, it would be valuable by association. And
right.
How do we do that, Patrick? It was sort of like,
I'll leave you with this, because I say the same thing about Bob that I said about Dutch Leonard, and it is this: the only thing better than reading them was knowing.
That's a lovely line to end on, Mike. Thank you so much for spending time with us again this evening. I look forward to our conversations, which happily are multiplying every year. So we'll see Mike in September with Jesse Stone, and we may see him with JP once again. When is that book coming out?
It comes out, I think, September, the Jesse Stone, September 7th, I think. And you know what, Barbara? Maybe we're traveling again by then. Wouldn't that be great?
It will be, but we're going to have to talk, because I'm going to BoucherCon in Minnesota on September 7th. So we're going to have to work out something. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, we do still have a few copies autographed by Mike of the final Sunny Randall, maybe, by Mike Lupica, called Robert B. Parker's Revenge Tour. It's a really terrific book.
Barbara, thank you. Patrick, it's great talking to you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.